I think this is an amazing film and really interesting. I think it's politically bullshit.
Oh, yes, of course, because there's a bunch of closed-minded racist morons that represent people in the seats of power.
So this is part of that conversation of like the imagined American working class that we've been doing for decades now.
These are Bollywood musicals. They just don't have dance numbers because Hollywood doesn't have the balls to just, put in a dance number. And if you can direct an action sequence, you can direct a dance sequence.
It's 5 fucking stars. It's absolutely unbelievably beautiful and amazing. And it is total propaganda for the Cuban Revolution. I don't think anymore that you can avoid fighting inside and outside of the state at the same time. I think there may be multiple ways to do that. I don't think electoral politics is the only way to do that.
Yeah, but some shit's got to get burned down too, so...
Right.
Honestly, it kind of warms my heart that somebody out there was thinking that the Watermelon Woman was a threat to, white, hetero, cis, Christian culture.
I know we're saying that this isn't technically like a good movie, but a movie with surprisingly good elements and a really fucked up package.
This ending, you have good characters that are entirely powerless against the unstoppable evil capitalists.
Mm-hmm. Only after Avengers did Marvel movies start doing as well as Ghost.
Right.
Starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and some very phallic clay.
Did the word pornography ever enter your mind when you were watching this film, Isaac?
Nope.
And I think it has the politics of cinema stamp of approval. If you want to use this as a first date movie, go for it.
It seemed to have worked out for my folks. Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. On this episode, we're celebrating Noirvember by looking at the influence of werewolves on the noir genre.
And I quit.
You're done?
I'm done.
You just can't take it anymore?
I'm not prepped for this topic. I have 0 tabs open on my computer that have to do with werewolves right now.
Well, you know what? I guess it's just going to have to be a one-man show now.
All right, lay it on me. What's the best film noir werewolf movie, Isaac?
Ooh, good question. Here's the problem. I'm going to say that there isn't one, and then somebody's going to totally come up with one, right? Because there's got to be a werewolf movie for everything. It's not going to be good because that's the problem with werewolf movies is there's not enough good ones. But
well, I'd say also it would have to be very specific in that it's it would have to be a Japanese film noir with a werewolf in it.
Right.
And that one I feel a little more confident as being one that does not exist. I don't know. I guess there's probably some Japanese werewolf movies. I don't know if there's any crossover with film noir though.
There's the Sonny Chiba movie Wolf Guy, which is technically a werewolf movie, even though he never actually transforms into a werewolf. He does have werewolf powers, and he is Sonny Chiba, which means he doesn't really need any extra powers.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, I think we both watched it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I did not realize it was Sonny Chiba when I was watching it, though.
Unfortunately, it is not a noir. Let's be honest. In good conscience, I can't say that. Is he a detective or something? Anyway, he's not. It's not film noir. So, all right. So I admit this is our actual theme is Japanese noir, and so we're actually not doing anything having to do with werewolves. I am being oppressed on this podcast. And, one day, dear listeners, it'll actually happen and you won't even see it coming. But no, in this case, we're doing Seijun, if I'm saying that correctly, Suzuki's Tokyo Drifter from 1966. This is not the first Suzuki movie we've done.
Indeed.
Not the first noir Suzuki movie we've done.
Mm-mm. Usually that's your cue to say what movie we have done, Isaac.
Oh, well, yeah, that would be the cue to do that. So just so everybody knows, I'm on strike. I happen to be a graduate student within the UC system, and we are right now on the first day of the largest higher education strike, at least in U.S. history. Technically, the units involve 48,000. I'm not sure everybody's on actually striking, but it's a lot. And so I was on the picket line all day. I didn't get a lot of sleep, and all I can think about is werewolves. So anyway,
wonderful little insight into your thought process today, Isaac.
It's gonna be real good. No, we watched Branded to Kill, which is such a crazily influential movie and one that kind of ruined his career for a while. Mm-hmm. And Tokyo Drifter is before, and you can see where he's going, which is unhinged and very new wavy.
Yeah.
But it's not there yet. And I have to admit, this is one of the first Japanese noir I ever saw, and I have deep affection for it as a pure style exercise, as a pure examples of 60s color, and as a movie in which the lead, who is an unmitigated badass hero with the fantastic name Phoenix Tetsu, I mean that's his nickname within the Yakuza underworld.
Right.
He's up against Tatsuzo the Viper. Excuse my pronunciation.
Also good nickname.
It's great. Yeah, they're great. They're fantastic.
Viper versus the Phoenix.
Right, exactly. Right, there's a lot going on here, and basically, it's just a pure example of vibrance and mild incoherence and beautiful 60s color and mod, and also a hero who screws with his opponents by singing the theme song of the movie repeatedly. He does this twice, and every time it gets everybody on edge. Like, he actually wins a fight basically from singing. It's great. If you're thinking this doesn't sound very noir-like, you know what? It is. Genre is flexible.
That's true. That's true. And also, the history of noir being what it is like a style, not really a genre. I feel like it lends itself to bending and being a bit more of a fluid definition.
Right.
Because if we were still doing film noir as prescribed, well, really as discovered by the French, Nino Frank, which is actually Italian-born French film critic in the 40s, realizing, hey, American films are kind of dark and, looking at these certain themes. If we were still doing just those themes, that'd be a very boring style. Like, it has evolved, and that's the 40s we're talking about for American films. By this time, we're getting into the 60s and into Japanese cinema. It's evolved, and also I think it's just interesting way for people to make films within the style of noir, because all different artists, but also all different countries kind of have their own takes on them. The Japanese film noir that I've seen do not resemble like, Eurocrime or French noir, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, that's what's really fun about investigating different. I'm going to fuck up and say film genre, film noir as a genre at some point here, but looking at film styles and how they can be kind of adapted from different artists and different stories in different countries is really fascinating.
Right. And I think, what's interesting about noir, I mean, noir is picked up in Japan, or is in Japan, very early. I mean, one of the first noir we ever covered was an Akira Kurosawa movie from the 40s. I think we did Stray Dog, which is a noir, like a very clear noir.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, a genre that's been in Japan for basically as long as it's been in the U.S.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, like it did in the U.S., and we're not going necessarily into like neo-noir territory, but I don't know, would this be maybe like a second wave noir or something like that, where the themes and elements are there that you'd expect from a film noir, but, well, especially going through Suzuki's awesome lens, like he's playing around in the film noir sandbox, but what we're getting is not what you would consider to be like a classic noir. But, a lot of those elements are there, which we will be kind of discussing here.
Yeah.
I found, as I was doing research for the show, I was kind of reading up on, I'm not super well versed in Japanese film history, although I've read a little bit about it. One of the things I go to is Ephraim Katz wrote like a physical book I have called the Film Encyclopedia, and describing, I always look up at filmmakers to see, it's little capsule reviews of like, about their career or their styles or whatever. And it references Suzuki as being known for his, I wrote it down here, being known for his irreverent humor, jarring visual style, entertainment over logic sensibility, and focusing on nihilistically cool characters.
Yes.
And that's Tokyo Drifter.
That is
Pretty
Tokyo
much
Drifter.
Yeah, it's all there. There's action, there's music, there's humor, there's some, definitely some over the top. There's definitely some jarring visual style. Like, it checks all those boxes. But as I was looking into it more and more, you mentioned we had covered Branded to Kill, which comes out in 1967. It's a year after Tokyo Drifter. He was operating as a director with Nikatsu Company for about a 10-year period, and he made 40 films. 40, not 14, 40 films, mostly of what we would consider to be like these B movies that were mostly within like the Yakuza genre, although he did do some, I'm not even going to attempt the pronunciation because I have a very, very American tongue, troubled youth pictures as well. I think he even did one that was like, young Yakuza or something that was a few years before this one. And so it, to me, being kind of, slightly Roger Corman obsessed, it really had the vibe of like his production style while within the Nikatsu company, which was a big, huge, major, Hollywood style studio operating in Japan. He was working in the Yakuza genre, but specifically kind of in the B movie environment, which allowed him to kind of get certain things into movies that maybe he wouldn't have if he was, given a larger budget. So it's kind of seems like one of those like operating under the radar stylistically and can do what he wanted to because he wasn't going over budget and he was making money.
Right.
So by the time we get to Tokyo Drifter, this one, he's experimenting quite a bit in visual style, editing, style of acting, cinematography, all stuff we'll be mentioning here. But the wall he really hit with Branded to Kill was the powers that be were not happy with it whatsoever, and it also didn't make money for them. So they didn't have the excuse of like, well, he's still making money.
Right. Like he can be weird if he's making cash, but I mean, did this movie do well?
Did Tokyo Drifter well enough, but it was one of those like, okay, man, you're on thin ice. After this one, they were very worried about the antisocial messages he was putting in his films, and ended up being dismissed after Branded to Kill was screened for the studio heads as dismissed for incomprehensibility in making his films. Even after, so he was dismissed, and there was enough of a youth following for him that there were some young folks in Japan that rallied outside the studio to try to get him his job back, but it wasn't a large enough crowd to really like actually make a difference or sway the company at all. So there was a following, and he was known within Japanese society, obviously, but not enough to like, let's get him his job back.
Yeah. I mean, so what's setting them off as antisocial about this movie?
I don't know that it was specifically with Tokyo Drifter, but because he was making those youth, he was making these like troubled youth genre films in the 50s, more of his early ones, and then he moved more specifically into Yakuza films. So it was more because he had kind of cornered the youth market. That's what I was getting that like Roger Corman vibe, where like, in America, he's making money by putting stuff out at the drive-in where youths are there.
Right.
And so he's appealing specifically to a youth market. Also, I would assume the same would hold true in Japanese culture, where like, if you don't have, maybe like a partner or a job or, a mortgage or whatever, you're paying for, if you are maybe in college or high school and you have some free time or some disposable income, you're going to the movies a bit more than someone who's busy and has a full-time job and a family and all that other stuff. So that youth market, I feel like there's some translatable or analogous things to that. We're like, oh, well, we can make at least this much money off the youth market, giving Suzuki another project or several every year, every calendar year, and we're going to make X amount of money because there's a youth market for it. But he just got a little too weird, so no more of that.
He decided to get more interesting.
It did. I think it did get more interesting, but also he tried to sue the company as well. From what I read, he successfully sued the company for wrongful dismissal because he did have a contract with them, but the result of that was being blacklisted. So he was not able to work for a little while because other studios kind of honored what Nikatsu had done and kind of blacklisted him. So he wasn't working for a little while. But in the long run, we got, not just Tokyo Drifter, but we also got Branded to Kill out of it. And like, damn, that's
thoroughly worth it.
Worth it in the long run. But, hey, we got some good art out of it. So,
yeah, I mean, the 70s are very sparse. It's true. But he does do like 3 movies, I think. And then he's back in with like 8 movies in the 80s.
And the Japanese film industry ended up, he won a Japanese Academy Award. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. I didn't write it down. He did a Taisho trilogy in the 80s and early 90s. It was very spread out, but very well critically acclaimed. So what I was looking up to get into Tokyo Drifter was like, it's got a 1966 date next to the name. That's when it came out. Well, that wasn't necessarily true for an American audience. Since we're sitting in the United States recording this, I was trying to see when was the first time his films really hit an American audience outside of festivals and all that. The best I could tell, he wasn't really a known director in America as far as critics go, or at least released on home video, or let alone like distributed in theaters until the 90s. There was a film comment article I found from like January, February issue of 92 that talks about a retrospective at the Vancouver International Film Festival of his films, including Tokyo Drifter.
Interesting.
So I find that kind of interesting that came about in the early 90s. And I was also then, once I was like, okay, let me search around for him in the early 90s. And I was finding like Wong Kar-wai and Quentin Tarantino and Jim Jarmusch all referencing him in interviews they're given in the early 90s. So I think, he hit an American audience, obviously not American because it's not Vancouver's Canada, but he hit an American audience by having a retrospective at the Vancouver International Film Festival, and some of those films then would tour in repertoire houses, college campuses, and then obviously, within home video, if you've got someone in the 90s like, Jim Jarmusch or Tarantino saying like, you got to watch this guy's stuff, his stuff is going to get some eyeballs. And then Criterion and Janus Films and those, did some restorations and re-releases and all that stuff.
Okay. So, I mean, this makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense with those two directors.
Oh, very much so. I couldn't, once I saw the Jim Jarmusch there, I was like, oh, Ghost Dog, Way of the Samurai. Like, there's a lot of Branded to Kill and Tokyo Drifter aesthetic in that movie of Jim Jarmusch's specifically, but also a lot of the way just Jim Jarmusch makes films, I think.
Well, I mean, look, even, into the, John Woo, I mean, I'm not just taking this out of nowhere. I mean, I did a little reading, John Woo, Tarantino, but I even think about stuff like, I'm not just talking about Tokyo Drifter, and we should talk a little bit about the plot, which is not very important, but is there.
There's not a ton of it, but yeah.
There's not a ton of it, but it is there. But, I think about something like John Wick, right? I wonder how that totally exists without certainly Yakuza movies and things like that, and of course Hong Kong and John Woo. So there's a line there, but I think even more directly, like I you could feel the connection. Less with this movie than Branded to Kill, but it's I think it's there.
Well, I think one of the lessons here is also you can experiment with your visual style and how you tell a story, and it doesn't just have to hit the beats of a classic film noir.
Right.
I mean, it can, but also like you can do that with different visual styles, and it sounds like it's sort of the case here with Suzuki, where there is limited budget, possibly limited time. I mean, if you're doing 4 movies a year, this is not it could still be a labor of love, but like it's kind of run and gun. Let's do this thing. So like, I know at one point, I think it was for this one, I was reading that he ended up coming up with an editing style with his editor because they just didn't have some footage for a shootout like the coverage that he had ideally wanted. You know what I mean? So it's one of those, like, you have to get inventive because you just don't have the funds or the time to shoot exactly maybe what you want to do.
Right. And it forces him to innovate visually in fantastic ways.
Right.
And then if you combine that with the color palette, right? So if you don't have the budget to do this and you're going to have to shoot this way, the suits in this movie that Tetsuo the Phoenix wears are amazing.
They are.
He's got, these blue, eggshell blue suits, and it just, the way it all sort of, the way the colors pop, the way, for instance, in both clubs, right? So you have one club which is sort of like a 60s rock and roll club, right?
Mm.
And that's the club of the villain. Well, all right, we'll do the plot in a second. And then the sort of more classy club of Tetsu's boss. Also just this, it's primarily blank space. They probably don't have the budget to fill it in. So it's just it's just these stark whites that help to bring out the sense of isolation, especially in the final. All right. Before we talk about the plot, the final showdown, the final showdown there brings out the sense of isolation and the starkness of the action against them. I mean, it's just incredible use of color.
Right. And not color, color in a very specific sense, because it's like a lot of singular colors. I was picturing that final shootout scene where like it feels like a white void. Like I was having a hard time thinking like, wait, where did that even take place at? Because it's sort of like a lot of a single color in some of these locations as well. But yes, so plot. Let's do the plot, Isaac.
So basically, Tetsuo the Phoenix the most skilled and absolute loyal. I mean, clearly this is their familial relationship with his boss. But he's one of the well, basically his boss, who's sort of an older Yakuza boss, has taken them out. They've made them go legit, and it's just the only henchmen left are him and one other guy, and they're in the middle of buying this building. They do have to repay debts, and they have a club, and another very powerful Yakuza boss who sort of represents a flashier, more entrepreneurial and less honorable style, is trying to take that building from them with all the dirty tricks, and they're much more vulnerable because they don't have a gang anymore. But also, Tetsu honors the wishes of his boss to a fault by taking a beating, for instance, and not fighting back because now he's legit. And continuously doing so, but actually being the one who sort of saves his boss over and over again, frankly, against the schemes of the rival gang, until it becomes enough of a problem that he's fighting back, that basically they make a deal for peace if he leaves, and he is forced to travel the land, I believe, to northern Japan, where he meets up. He goes to the bar after much adventures because the rival gang is sending people after him, including his rival Tetsuzo the Viper, who he's already defeated by distraction through song in a fantastic scene in a car junkyard with the compactors and flames and everything. But he's forced to go on the run, where he meets a former member of the gang that's chasing him, who is also, in a sense, I think you brought up the similarities to samurai films and Ronin. He is, in a way, like a Yakuza Ronin, right? He is, except that he's not masterless. He's left his master, but his loyalty remains, and that is central to him. So he meets basically the most skilled operator of the people chasing him, who no longer works with that gang, who's sort of trying to convince him that that the Yakuza world is not one in which there's honor or ultimately loyalty, and that he shouldn't keep to this. Whereas his position is loyalty to an absolute fault to what is functionally his father, right? Not his father genetically, but who functions as his father. I mean, they, instead of going out into the club or whatever, they have a quiet dinner together, and that's good enough for both of them. I mean, they're sort of very domestic in a way.
Yeah.
He goes up to the bar of his rival, of his boss's ally, and they're able to actually, with the help of this other person, and there's an amazing bar fight scene which we can talk about, able to sort of kill off the people chasing him until more come to kill him, and he realizes that his boss, or he's convinced that his former boss, has made a deal with the people chasing him and is willing for him to die. And in fact, maybe there's no such thing as loyalty here, and he goes back for a final showdown. That's the whole movie. Normally we take these from like IMDb or something, and I just listed that off from memory. So it's a little wandery.
Nope. Excellent. Because if you just take it right off of IMDb or Letterboxd or something, it's like 4 sentences, and honestly, it doesn't make any sense. Because it doesn't maybe sound like it in that description if you haven't seen the movie. It is a very simple and straightforward plot that kind of doesn't matter to a certain extent, because Suzuki is playing around with images and sequences more than he is worried about making sure that you understand the story he's telling.
Yeah, those jump cuts can get real, like where are we?
Yeah, very not disorienting, like in a bad way, but in a way where you're like, okay, wait, hold on, pause, rewind. Did I miss a character? Who are we talking about right now? But if you let the whole thing just kind of wash over you, like it makes sense by the end, even if it does seem a little confusing along the way, he's definitely much more, as we mentioned, style, jarring visual style over substance, worrying about things being logical weren't really a focus he had. He wanted, entertainment value and, a splash of humor or some song, more than an intricately detailed plot.
Yeah, there is the arc as Phoenix Tetsu learns about loyalty, right? Learns about the ways of the world, especially the world as it is now. Though it's not, is the argument that in this corrupted 60s playhouse, right? I think I compared it a little bit to Blow Up briefly. But it's not, right? It's very different. But in the sense of this sort of, the world is sort of this playground in a sense, and which not all of it is. I mean, there's grimy bars and everything, but like specifically the bar of the two nightclubs, one of which is more sort of classical, sort of classy and classical, and the other one is just very, very like mod hip place. He's there's an arc, and we can make arguments about the nature, the corrupting nature of capitalism, right? About this of business of the fact that power structures ultimately are not something you can rely on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That systems like this in which you're expected to be loyal will not be loyal to you. Ultimately, that the powerful will betray you. And yes, that's there. And those are political points, and this is a political podcast.
Well, I was wondering about this angle too, and it's one of those that I don't know if I would have thought about it had we not, be doing this particular show. So he has this boss. Phoenix has this boss that he is very fiercely loyal to, and the boss seems to be very loyal back to him. But do you think that loyalty would have stayed if the boss didn't try to quote unquote go legit? Like, is there an argument for the corrupting power of going legit within a corporate capitalist world is what turned his boss on Phoenix?
No, I think his boss is acting more Yakuza like
in the corporate structure than.
Yeah, I think after he leaves, because he actually sends people to kill him, or his boss sends people to kill him, which is not going legit, right? Prior to that, he had avoided doing anything like that, and actually Tetsu had sort of had to break the rules to defend him. Both of them had actually fired guns. I mean, part of what's going on is that they've in the ensuing conflict, there's been multiple sort of killing of innocent people. So all of them have blackmail on each other,
right?
In terms of the criminal justice system. But like, yeah, no, I think part of it is it's not the corrupting influence.
Well, I just meant when he was a Yakuza boss, he wasn't turning on Phoenix. Like, he was his protege, he was his, top guy. And so if he would have just stayed a Yakuza boss, that relationship could have just coasted until one of them was presumably taken out by another rival gang.
Right.
But since he went into the quote unquote legit world, that was actually the corrupting influence, which led to him turning on his, his protege, his son here.
I mean, it's not so much that, it's the pressure that he's under from other Yakuza bosses when he can't protect himself in the same way. Right? I mean, part of it is, it's that
because he tried to go legit. He should have just stayed a Yakuza boss. Right.
But the problem isn't legitness. It's actually the vampirism of the whole system, right? So like, it's that you can't
right.
You can't be legit in this world.
Sorry, I know we're recording on audio. I was doing legit with quotes.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
So like, I mean, I think that says, it may say something about opinions of post-war Japan. A lot of, Japanese movies in this period seem to almost always be struggling at one point or another with World War II and also Reconstruction and the American presence and so forth. And also with rapid economic growth, which I think by the 60s, I think they are experiencing, right? A very quickly changing society. And so, yeah, in this world of sharks, if he had stayed armed, he would have been able to do this. I don't know if that's a coherent message or what the movie is trying to say.
I feel like I put this movie in the category of, if you're cranking these movies out as he was, it's one of those like the politics are embedded in there because it's just making it so quickly.
Right.
Even if it's not overtly stated in the movie, it's still there. Like, like we said, at one point they're in a bar and there's like a fight against, I think it's like United States Navy sailors.
Oh, this bar fight is amazing, actually.
So like, that isn't overtly a political statement in and of itself, because like, oh, well, that's just there's a port here and there's a base, so blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, but it's also, that is saying something. Because you could have easily not had that scene.
And I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it actually involves at least European, maybe American exotic dancer, and which I don't know what that's saying. I hadn't really seen that before in one of these, but I have to, it's like I've seen a decent number of these movies, but I can't say that I've seen huge numbers of, especially 60s Yakuza movies.
Right.
And 60s noir. But it, yeah, I mean, that's right. I think that's a really good way to put it, right? Is that the politics are embedded because of the very situation that Japan is in.
Right.
So,
and the style in which these are made, like these are churned out. This is a quick turnaround.
But they don't actually have to have the American sailors. You have to hire Americans and stuff. So like you didn't have to do that, but it is there. It's a standard thing. I mean, this isn't Pigs and Battleships, which is another Yakuza Noir, but very different from the earlier 60s, where really it revolves around the American presence and its effect on Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure somebody with a deeper knowledge of Japanese society could like pick out something even deeper in this and say, oh, but it all was about that. But it's there. It's a presence and it's felt, as well as sort of this very, at least the Yakuza world is seen as very vicious. And I think we can say something about authority in general. Here's the thing is, when I think through the limited number of movies where I've seen of this genre, there's always an honor code, right, within the Yakuza. Right. And, this is something, I mean, if you, I don't know, read Lone Wolf and Cub, which is set in like the 17th century, same, right? It's part of the genre. If you watched a movie involving gangsters from before, there, there's a culture within the Yakuza, within sort of like Japanese sort of gang culture going way back, at least in popular media. I don't know historically. But there's never one of these movies where your boss doesn't betray you.
Right.
It just seems to be pretty standard at this point, and I actually think that's pretty funny.
Well, I mean, it makes for good drama, because when your allegiances are broken, then that gives somebody a good sense of like righteous revenge. Can be a good motivating factor there too. If there was no betrayal, like I guess your story could just be like rival gangs, maybe. But I wanted to go back to that thought because it's just my born and raised in America kind of mindset. I was comparing this film in my head to like, okay, these are mid 60s Yakuza films coming out of Japan, through the film noir kind of lens, but specifically looking at Yakuza films, when you talk about like the allegiance or like the honor code that comes to it, I was first thinking like, does that come out of the kind of samurai tradition, at least within cinema? Because you have plenty of samurai films at this point, and there is like an honor code amongst the different samurai clans, or there's the idea of the Ronin, which is kind of the idea of the drifter here. In this particular case, it doesn't have an allegiance anymore and just is out wandering the land. But that coupled also with the thought of what was the status of the gangster or mafia specifically films in America in the 60s versus what Japan was doing, or Suzuki specifically with his couple of films here in the 60s. And I think it's kind of an interesting comparison because in American cinema, we've got the pre-Godfather mafia films and the post-Godfather mafia films, but we don't get to that until the 70s here. And so looking before that, you've got like the film noir, obviously in the classic sense here, coming out of Hollywood in the 40s and 50s, but you don't really and obviously the mafia has been around in America since, well, I mean, it exploded with prohibition and bootlegging and whatnot, but that's interesting. Like the only one I could think of to mention would be like, because I just have Roger Corman on the brain. Like I mentioned, he did St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1967, which is a year after Tokyo Drifter, technically speaking. But that's a movie about American gangsterism in the 30s. It's not a contemporary set gangster film, or mafia film is really what we're thinking of here, like hierarchy and allegiances and betrayals and things like that.
There's movies like The Brothers Rico, for instance, and I feel like Richard Conte, he's in The Godfather, and he was playing mafia guys before that too, and that's 57. So I think it's entered in a little bit. You do see the mafia starting to show up. You do see some specifically white ethnic themes, but white ethnics. You can find one about the Poles. You can find a few of when there's Italian actors, it's brought in, but generally people are treated like wasps unless you really can't do it. Once again with those few differences, yeah. So something like The Brothers Rico.
Within like an American context, you do have the production code and the long tentacles of like self-censorship going on and what you could and couldn't show in films, which starts to break down. Well, see our coverage of films of the 60s as we went through a lot of that there, but it starts to break down as you go into the 60s, which gives you eventually The Godfather, on this side from the Hollywood angle. But it's not like Tokyo Drifter or Branded to Kill or anything are like overtly like in your face Bonnie and Clyde level violent. Like there's violence there, but it's not really pushing boundaries the way like a production code would have thought of it if it was made here in the United States.
And they can do so much more in Japan already.
Well, that's what I mean.
Honestly.
Yes, like it's different kind of environment.
I'm both in terms of violence and way more in terms of sex. And no, I think so. I think what you're pointing out is very true. The mafia has shown up some. It's a little bit in the consciousness, but basically, The Godfather is going to really make this happen in a totally different new way, which in a way matches sort of your Yakuza movies in terms of not just that you have gangsters, but that there is a culture, right? There's a universe and sort of a way of thinking and so forth, which is compelling to audiences, right? There's codes, there's structures to these that you can know, and they're sort of based on real life in both cases, sort of being important. Whereas, we were sort of talking, I don't think there aren't a lot of American gangster movies in the 60s, but if you think of something like Point Blank or was it Crime USA, the Samuel Fuller?
Oh, Underworld USA,
which is a great movie, but neither of those are about the mafia. They're really about
the structure of it. Yeah.
Well, part of what's going on with both of those is it's very much a comment on big corporations, and this is sort of the era, the dominance of the independent sort of executive and these big faceless corporations, and shareholders aren't as important. Yet we haven't had the shareholder revolution, we haven't had financialization. And sort of, so these big conglomerates, and so part of it is you have these criminal organizations that are trying to look like that, and this movie, these guys are all business guys, and capitalism is very much at play, but it's not like this. So that's that's trying to make a social commentary in those two movies, but yeah, you don't have the equivalent of the Yakuza.
Right.
You're just not going to be able to sort of match that. It's another way. I think we said this before. The last time we sort of dealt with this period is Japanese film all around is the best of the 60s in terms of just artistic, but both in terms of artistic ambition, but just the sheer versatility of genre and excelling at all of them.
Yeah.
In which, a lot of your your genre, your genre pictures, your samurai pictures, for instance, which are sort of like, you can say this of Westerns as well. Okay, I admit this is not unique, but these are some of your best art. Some of these are some of your best art movies. They may not be sort of like your regular Chambara, but like you're creating kaiju movies. You're making the best noir. You're making these Yakuza movies, which really there isn't an American equivalent of yet, frankly. And then you're making these. Your new wave is just as innovative as anywhere else, is starting just as early and is really interesting.
Yeah.
There's just, I don't think anybody can match it.
See, for instance, the fact that we're discussing right now a director who just sort of specialized in B movies and cranked out 40 movies in 10 years. And we're discussing, one of those movies, which didn't even make it to, American eyeballs or North American eyeballs until the 90s. And it in of itself is its own gem.
Right. It's just it's. I mean, this is a fascinating.
Deep well.
This is a deeply entertaining, and yeah, this is a deep well. I honestly maybe. I mean, I think the Italians come closest in terms of high and low cinema, and in which your low cinema is so fucking good that it's high cinema, but there's still not quite as much versatility.
Right.
I mean, I think kaiju push you over the edge. It's, you're inventing this.
I thought you were going to go there with that.
I mean, there's other giant monster movies. King Kong exists, but like you're inventing this. Yeah, no, Tokyo. So why is this a noir? It is.
It is. We do have the presumably doomed protagonist. You have betrayal. Some of the key highlights there. The one thing noir that I kind of in my brain was like, oh, it doesn't really check that box, would be the cinematography. Maybe isn't traditional noir. Like I wrote in my notes as I was watching it that it felt to me like a pop art, crime cinema, absurdist comedy musical. That isn't traditionally what I would write about a film noir as I'm watching it. You know what I mean? So yeah, then also going along with the cinematography, not really kind of checking the film noir box. Femme fatales are a hallmark of film noir, even like up through neo noir, and we don't really have that here either.
Right. I mean, like the closest equivalent to what's going on here and to Suzuki is Point Blank and what's the director? Borman.
Oh, John Borman, yeah.
Yeah, who is playing with all of the new sort of European toolkit and so forth to tell a noir story. Yeah,
I think Suzuki's doing here too. Like it's a lot of world cinema trends of the time period. Very heavily French New Wave in the editing style and the color palette of Godard. I think combining actually maybe even kind of like MGM musical style color palette in fact as well.
Yeah, no, there's a straight. It really is combined honestly with better action shooting than what's coming out elsewhere, and a very well formed. Like we've said, a very well-formed gangster genre, which is really good, which I don't think is really matched, let's say, in France or the United States.
Sure.
So it's, so part of it is like Tetsu is, it's interesting because he's kind of baby-faced, right? The actor, Tetsuo Watari, is kind of baby-faced. He's, he's sort of swoonable, right? He's literally singing his theme song. どこで生きても流れ者どうせさすらい一人身の明日はどこやら風に聞け可愛いあの子の胸に聞け Which is supposed to be, I think it's, it's supposed to be sort of a pop hit in a way. That's also incredibly un-noir. I mean, not just the fact that you have singing, but like that's sort of what you're going for. But he is the tragic masculinity that oftentimes is sort of the fodder for noir, in that he's loyal to a fault. He's vastly capable and is absolutely loyal. That means that he can be fooled, and he can be pushed and pushed in the way that he ultimately is. His loyalty makes him a drifter, right? His loyalty leads him down this road of loneliness. And it should be pointed out, so part of it is he's so cool that the beautiful singer in the club of his boss, who no one would have an objection to their relationship, she's totally in love with him, and he will just not go for it.
I think the boss is even encouraging it. Isn't he?
He's encouraging it. Yeah, but why would why wouldn't he? There's literally nothing wrong with this. You two clearly like each other, and he won't do it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's this hyper stoic masculinity in which I could not do what I do if you were here. It's not totally explained because this movie doesn't care that much. But it's definitely there. And at the end, spoilers, after he has wiped everyone out and she's left and he's free to be with her, no, I'm still a drifter, right? I've lost all the moorings of my life because my boss is a traitor and so forth. All the moorings of his life, he's a drifter. Though in fact, it turns out that the other henchman who he'd met on the road, who had sort of tried to convince him that this is the way of the world and you can't trust bosses, turns out to be right, and he's found camaraderie there, masculine camaraderie, right? Is there a queer reading of this movie? I don't know. Maybe. Is there a queer reading of almost every masculine action movie? Probably.
Possibly.
But in this case, I mean, certainly the relationships that seem he has both father figures, but then also with, basically he's saved by Kenji Izawa, this former gangster, and their relationship. I don't know if I'm reading homoeroticism in it. It's certainly, he both doesn't like him because the guy isn't loyal, but yet there's clearly like a connection between the two because they're both sort of ace Yakuza enforcers who have been ultimately undermined by their bosses or have had reasons to realize that the system doesn't work. And so there's, I don't know, maybe there's chemistry between them at a certain level, honestly. But she's just, the end of this movie is just like, no, I don't have room for you. Like he just, I can't do this. I can't have this romantic relationship with this woman. Because I'm a drifter now. It's like before it's because you were a henchman. Now it's because you're a drifter. Is this form of masculinity about denial? Right? Is he virtuous because he's ultimately Spartan and serves others, whereas everyone, the bosses, serve themselves and are ultimately capitalists?
Well, also it says something too when his former boss, former mentor, former father figure takes his own life in order to redeem himself.
Right. That's true.
I think that says something about maybe like, all right, well, you're released, and now the only thing he has is his dedication to his drifter, wanderer, possibly shades of Ronin lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what I meant. Is like he has nothing else left except for this woman, who he could be with, because the people going after him don't exist. His old boss don't exist. He could be, but he chooses the wandering life, which in a certain sense is going back to the world of Kenji.
Well, it's also very film noir too, because you can't have a happily ever after ending in a film noir either.
I mean, I think that's what makes it film noir, right? So he, in a certain sense, he's a tragic figure.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this film noir. You have unrequited desires or a search for meaning in structures that are too rotten to be the source of them. That there's nothing more film noir than that.
Very true. Very true.
It's just most film noir heroes don't sing their theme song.
That's true. And from the American film noir perspective, I think we're better off for it. Although I would have loved to have seen what kind of singing talent Richard Widmark has. I bet it's in there.
You know what? The man, I have full confidence in the man. Who knows?
I do too. No, there was a shade when he is singing his own theme song when he's out drifting that maybe just the time period or the way the color palette was that I was getting like Elvis vibes, like because Elvis had a, I'd say fairly shitty film career. I've watched a bunch of them. They don't really stand out to me as being real great cinematic achievements, but you're like, man, Elvis, born in a different country, doing movies and music, this could be an Elvis character.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, except that, Elvis would never be in a movie this grim, this violent.
No.
Or this cool.
I don't get the lady. What are you talking about? This is not a movie. That's not a very good Elvis impression, but I assume that'd be his reaction to this screenplay.
Right. But yes, there's a certain element of, he is a little bit, well, because it's the same sort of thing. It's a featured song that's supposed to be on the radio kind of thing.
Right.
And that's where you stick in an Elvis song, is that, this is going to be this will be a, hit or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe.
But also within like that Phoenix's character, like he's effortlessly cool. Like you said, he's got like the awesome suits. I never once thought he was actually going to be killed in like the large, brawl fight as he's drifting and getting all these different fights and shootout. Like I never really thought his life was in danger at that point in the movie. He gets out of every deadly situation. He sings or whistles the song through. Like, I don't know. It was just one of those like, all right, this is the definition of cool right here.
I love it so much. It's so fucking cool. He's so cool. What's cool about it? He's effortless and awesome, but so serious and stoic and self-sacrificing. it's so many shades. There's just a little bit of that, even that James Dean element to it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he's the hurt boy. I mean, he's not actually. That's the thing. He's very satisfied being the son of the son of the gangster. But
But you can interpret it that way.
yeah, you could.
I think, especially with a director coming off of like the troubled youth films that he was making, I think very much you could read into that kind of troubled heartthrob, because he isn't settling down. He doesn't have a romantic interest or potential within the story of the movie as well.
Right.
So it's the eternally effortlessly cool and eternally single hot hitman with the shades whistling a tune.
I mean, I'm making my queer move on this movie. Is he single though? Is he?
He's married to the lifestyle,
or he's going back to Kenji. Anyway,
or he is. Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
In Isaac's fan fiction sequel.
It's just a queer reading of the movie. I think there's elements of it there. You could do that with a lot of movies, but yeah.
Well, actually, speaking of which, there is a Tokyo Drifter 2.
What?
It's Tokyo Drifter 2. The sea is bright red as the color of love is the American translation. Tetsuya Watari is back. I haven't watched it. He completes a prison term in Tokyo, and he goes to Kochi to meet his big brother, and I guess an adventure ensues.
What?
Yeah.
Tokyo Drifter
came
2?
out in 66, it's saying, so like immediate sequel.
Yeah, but not the same director.
No.
That is wild. I'm sorry, I'm having a moment here because, so dear listeners, I was not informed of this ahead of time. This is not me acting. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Oh, here, no, this supports your fan fiction theory here. The first line of the description on Letterboxd is, the film focuses on the romantic life of Tetsuo, the drifter, and the girls he loves but can never quite bring himself to settle down with.
Right.
So, there you go.
Sure.
But any final thoughts on Tokyo Drifter, Isaac?
Well, so, we're choosing Japanese noir because, honestly, and we're specifically this month, we're really doing Yakuza Noir. We weren't originally going to do that, but I think we're doing two sort of, crime oriented noirs, because they're really they're fun and they're different and they play with the genre and mix it in different ways than the Americans are doing at this point. Though, if you watch latter noirs, like the latter 50s, it could get real interesting in the American context as the genre sort of spiral, sort of flowing away. Though I think we talked last time we did noirs, the point is like, and then neo-noirs are like, back, and some of the best movies. There's lots of neo-noirs in the 70s. So the genre in the US doesn't really go away very long. But nonetheless, in a certain sense, they're both doing their own version of it in a sort of like generic noir sense, and then also playing with it in fascinating ways, in ways that the Americans outside of Borman, I don't think are quite doing yet until the 70s. And so, it's a lot of it. It's interesting. And also, these are just two movies, personally, I just really wanted to cover because they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So maybe this podcast is an excuse for me to rewatch movies.
That's fine.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all. Not at all. I grabbed a couple of critic quotes to wrap up Tokyo Drifter here. One I got from Donald Ritchie, who wrote this book I have called 100 Years of Japanese Film that's really good. And since we are talking, we said about basically like a B movie director is kind of how history has remembered him, although there's some amazing diamonds in the rough there with those that output that Suzuki has. Donald Ritchie described Tokyo Drifter as really just another Yakuza film, but all decked out with bright colors, stagey sets, songs, jokes, and minimal plot. Delight and mayhem is its only message.
Yeah, probably. I think we tried to pull a lot of messages out, but I think a lot of those are just in generic Yakuza movies, by and large. Not all of them, but I think there are some unique things in this, but like, yeah, by and large, it's just the aesthetic is just wild.
Well, so here's the other one that I pulled that basically is it. Just a rewording of what you just said there, Isaac. Howard Hampton wrote that Tokyo Drifter was an engraved invitation to the 24/7 party of the 60s, the flip side of the assassinations and napalm and anguish, indulging the pop love of surface and artifacts over Freudian anxieties and Marxian imperatives.
That's real deep.
But as we mentioned before too, I think there is a political and social message you can pull out of movies that are made like real quick, on the fly, usually on the cheap. I think there's just it captures sometimes just the feeling of, you know, that moment in that particular country, in that particular town, in that particular environment in a way that it's sort of just doing accidentally because it's not thinking or that self-reflexive necessarily in how it's being made. It's just, we got to make this, we're making this genre, especially genre movies as well. I think it can capture a lot inadvertently by just operating very quickly and cheaply within that genre, but also having, you know, master craftspeople working behind the scenes and in front of the camera as well.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, in some ways, it's like, oh wait, this is why we do this podcast, because movies that are not overtly political are political.
Absolutely.
So, you know, and I think we've tried to tease out some of the potentially political themes in this one that are, as you point out, sort of embedded there just by, maybe not by coincidence, because there's a choice there, but they're part of the background of the times.
Right.
Or how people view things as new, but they may not always be, especially in terms of sort of voracious capitalism and greed, which maybe a theme that comes up more in 60s. It does come up more in 60s Japanese film, I think. I'm not an expert, because you're not in the post-war Reconstruction anymore. You're in the boom times. So like, it would make sense.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's sort of a tale as old as time. Check this movie out if you haven't seen it. It is
absolutely
a lot of fun.
And it's free. A really good copy of it I watched was on archive.org. If you don't have a Criterion subscription or own it on physical media from Criterion, you can watch it for free over at archive.org.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like free.
What are we doing for our next Noirvember Japanese noir selection, Isaac?
Oh, we're pulling out the big guns. Not just in terms of films.
I don't know guns that well, but is a Colt a big gun?
No, it's not necessarily a very big gun. I mean, it's a company, right? Like it's Colt gun. Well, we're experts on firearms. No, we're watching A Colt Is My Passport from 1967, the next year, made by Takashi Nomura, and starring one of the great badasses, like just tough guys, but also tough guys with a full acting range and with all the feelings in cinema. Joe Shishido. This is a movie which is just as much embedded in its moment.
Mm-hmm.
We will see the influences of various cuts of international film. A little less new wave, like French new wave in there or whatever. Though I think it's there, but a little more spaghetti, and still a heart of noir. But yeah, that's what we're doing next time.
Yeah. Cult Is My Passport, 1967. Again, also, I think is on Criterion, but also is on archive.org, which is where I watched it at just a couple days ago. So free if you don't have the money for a Criterion disc right now. But before we fully sign off, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you are enjoying the show, tell a friend or two. We're also promoting on the usual social media stuff. Just check the show notes, whatever device or platform you're listening to this on. Look at the show notes there, and you can have links to all of that stuff. And until next time, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. And, well, stay safe out there. What?